Think of like the most charismatic person you know.
Oh, we all have that one person.
Right. The one who can walk into a room full of complete strangers and, I don't know, within 5 minutes they have everyone laughing, sharing personal stories, and just feeling like they've known each other for years.
It's almost annoying how easy they make it look.
Exactly. And we tend to look at people like that and assume they were just born with some magical innate gift. We think charisma is just a personality trait, like you either have it or you don't.
Which is such a massive misconception.
Yeah, so what if I told you their conversational flow isn't magic at all? What if it's actually a highly specific, totally learnable architecture of words?
Because it is. It is entirely an architecture. And I think the problem is when we try to study how to be better communicators, we just look in all the wrong places.
We really do. We focus on like accumulating these massive vocabularies or, mastering really complex grammatical structures.
Right. Like in the linguistics world, there is this standard called the CEFR scale, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. That's a mouthful.
It is, yeah. But basically, it grades fluency from A1, which is your very basic beginner level, all the way up to C2, which is widely considered to be like absolute mastery.
And see, when I hear C2 mastery, my mind immediately goes to a very rigid academic setting.
Sure, like a university lecture hall.
Exactly. I picture someone flawlessly reciting a political science dissertation, using these $10 words perfectly, never pausing, never making a single grammatical error. It sounds like a performance, really.
And that is exactly the widespread misconception we're talking about. A lot of people equate advanced communication with, performing intellect.
Right, trying to sound smart.
Yes. But true C2 level communication, the kind that actually builds relationships and, commands a room, it's rarely about the complexity of the vocabulary itself.
So what is it about then?
It is fundamentally about psychological safety.
Psychological safety. Exactly. It is the ability to read a social environment, anticipate the friction points in an interaction, and strategically deploy language to make the person across from you feel comfortable, understood, and just eager to connect.
That is so much deeper than just knowing big words. So today, we are going to tear down the illusion of natural charisma.
I love that. Let's tear it down.
We are going to decode the invisible mechanics of perfect conversations. And we're going to do this by diving into the source material and analyzing two very distinct real-world scenarios.
Two scenarios that most of you listening will probably find incredibly relatable.
Oh, absolutely. First, we're going to look at a workplace meet cute. That terrifying moment of initiating contact with a complete stranger in a new office.
Always a high anxiety situation.
Always. And then we are going to escalate the stakes significantly. We're going to look at a tense, emotionally heavy family discussion between a mother and her adult son.
So we're going from like low stakes professional to high stakes personal.
Exactly. The contexts are polar opposites. The emotional weight is totally different. But the underlying conversational tools, the specific techniques used to diffuse anxiety and foster genuine dialogue are remarkably identical.
Which is fascinating, really.
It is. So if you are an introvert listening to this, or if you are actively trying to improve your fluency in a second language, or even if you're just dreading an upcoming family reunion, pay close attention.
Yes, take notes.
Because by the end of this deep dive, you are going to walk away with a very practical blueprint for navigating these interactions. So let's jump straight into the first scenario from our sources.
Let's set the scene.
All right, we are in a corporate cafeteria. It's loud, it's intimidating. We have David, who is on his first week in the creative team.
Poor David.
Right. He doesn't know the unwritten rules, he barely knows where the bathrooms are, and he's sitting all alone eating his lunch.
The cognitive load of being the new guy is just immense. I mean, you are hyper-vigilant, constantly assessing whether you are fitting in, probably overthinking every single facial expression you make.
Oh, totally. You're wondering if you're chewing too loudly. So enter Sarah. She's been at the marketing company for about 6 months. She spots David, walks right up to his table, and her opening line is, "Hi, you must be David, the new guy in the creative team. I'm Sarah from marketing. Mind if I sit here?"
Okay, so on the surface, that sounds like a very standard, polite greeting.
Yeah, nothing crazy.
But if we put this under a microscope, this is actually a highly calibrated social maneuver.
Really? Break that down for me.
Well, it is a masterclass in what we call the presumptive opening. Let's look at the exact phrasing. You must be David.
Right, she didn't ask, "Are you David?"
Exactly. She isn't asking a question. She is stating a highly probable conclusion based on context clues.
Okay, I have to admit, the first time I analyzed this part of the source material, my introvert alarms started blaring.
But I'm sure they did.
Like, if you're a naturally shy person, the idea of walking up to a stranger and boldly declaring you must be David feels like walking a tightrope without a net.
It feels risky.
Huge risk. What if he's not David? What if he's like the IT guy who has worked there for 3 years and you just never noticed him? It feels like you are opening the door to immediate catastrophic awkwardness.
And that fear of getting it wrong, that's what paralyzes a lot of people. It's why they opt for the safe route, which usually takes the form of an interrogation.
An interrogation, like asking a million questions.
Right. They walk up and say, "Excuse me, are you the new guy? What's your name? Are you David? Do you work in creative?"
Which instantly puts the other person on the defensive. Suddenly, David is the subject of an investigation while he's just trying to eat a sandwich.
Exactly. When you ask a string of questions like that, you place the entire conversational burden on the stranger. You are basically demanding that they explain their presence to you.
Oh, I see. So Sarah's approach, taking that tiny micro risk of being wrong, is actually an act of conversational generosity.
Generosity is the perfect word for it.
Yeah.
By using prior knowledge, she eliminates the friction of a cold open.
She is signaling to David, like, I pay attention to this environment, I already know who you are, which means you already belong here.
Yes. It completely reframes his identity in that room. He goes from being the isolated stranger to a recognized member of the ecosystem in, 3 seconds?
And it hands him the easiest script in the world to follow. He doesn't have to scramble to invent an elevator pitch about who he is.
Right. The setup is already done for him.
But here is where the sources show how we separate average communicators from advanced ones. David's response is critical here.
Very critical.
If Sarah serves a conversational tennis ball over the net, David can't just catch it and put it in his pocket.
No, a one-word answer, even a very polite "yes, I am," is basically a conversational dead end.
It just kills the momentum.
It does. It forces the initiator, Sarah, in this case, to scramble for another topic immediately.
Right, so let's look at what David actually says in this scenario. He replies, "Oh, hey, Sarah. Yeah, that's me. Of course, sit down. I was actually hoping to meet more people from other departments."
Okay, notice what he did there.
He confirms his identity, but then he immediately utilizes a technique we call expanding the answer.
Yes.
He throws a completely new piece of information onto the table, his desire to network outside his own department.
And by expanding his answer like that, he accomplishes two things simultaneously. First, he keeps the momentum of the dialogue moving forward, giving Sarah new material to work with.
He's tossing the ball back.
Exactly. Second, and honestly more importantly, he validates her decision to approach him.
Oh, that's a great point.
He is implicitly saying, your intuition was correct, and your presence here is a positive thing for me. It rapidly lowers the physiological stress for both of them.
So they've successfully bypassed that awful, awkward introduction phase. They are sitting together, but now they face the hardest transition in networking.
Moving from the basic pleasantries into a dialogue that actually builds a real connection.
Right, because people in professional environments, they usually default to what I like to call interview mode.
Oh, the dreaded interview mode.
You know the one. They sit up totally straight, they project flawless competence, and they try to act like they've never made a single mistake in their entire careers.
The armor goes up. It is a very natural defense mechanism to protect one's professional status, especially when you're new.
But Sarah intentionally drops her armor. This is key. She asks David how his first week is going, and before he can give some rehearsed, PR-friendly answer, she adds, I remember feeling completely lost when I started here 6 months ago.
And that right there is the pivot point of the entire interaction.
It is brilliantly counterintuitive. I mean, in a competitive corporate culture, admitting you were completely lost feels like handing someone a weapon to use against you.
Feels like weakness.
Exactly.
Right.
But in social psychology, our sources point to a concept known as the pratfall effect.
Ah, yes. Discovered back in the 1960s, I believe.
Right. And the basic idea is that if you are generally perceived as a competent person, making a small mistake, like, say, spilling a cup of coffee, or in this case, admitting a past weakness, it actually makes people like you significantly more.
Because flawless perfection is alienating.
It really is. It makes people intimidated. But vulnerability is magnetic.
And we really must pay close attention to the specific type of vulnerability she uses here. She employs what we call past tense vulnerability.
Past tense, right. Because she does not say, I am completely lost right now.
No, saying she is currently lost would completely undermine her credibility.
It would make David panic, like, oh no, my new coworkers have no idea what they're doing.
Exactly, that would just be alarming. But by placing the struggle firmly in the past, I remember feeling completely lost. She demonstrates empathy without sacrificing her authority.
That's a really fine line to walk, but so effective.
It is. She is basically communicating, I stood exactly where you are standing right now. It is overwhelming, but I figured it out, and I am thriving now, which implies that you will figure it out too.
It shifts the dynamic entirely. They are no longer two cautious employees evaluating each other. They've become a guide and a traveler.
I love that analogy.
And think about the physical relief David must feel in that moment. I mean, shifting from interview mode to collaborator mode, he has been holding his breath all week, trying to look like the perfect hire.
Exhausting.
Sarah's admission is like a release valve. She gives him permission to just exhale.
And he takes the invitation. In the source text, he admits the week has been overwhelming, and they start naturally comparing their work histories.
Which naturally ushers them into what we can categorize as the dance of small talk.
The dance, yes. Because advanced communicators never linger on a single topic until it is utterly depleted.
They don't beat a dead horse.
No, they weave a tapestry of subjects, professional, personal, past, present, to find multiple points of resonance.
So we see them trace a very fluid path. They start on past job stress, complaining about long hours at previous ad agencies. Then they pivot to future projects, discussing some tech startup campaign.
Establishing that mutual professional respect.
Right. But the true test of a conversationalist happens when you leave the safety of that professional sandbox and venture into personal hobbies.
Oh, yes. The hobbies question.
Sarah asks the classic question. What do you like to do outside of work?
Which is a seemingly innocuous question that actually contains a massive conversational landmine.
A huge landmine. So David answers honestly. He says, I'm really into hiking and rock climbing. There are some great trails about an hour north of the city. What about you?
Okay, let's pause right there.
Yes, let's pause. Because if you are Sarah and you absolutely despise the outdoors, this is a very dangerous intersection.
It really is. I think average communicators usually fall into one of two terrible traps here.
Let's explore those traps. What's the first one?
The first is usually the reflex to people pleaser.
Yes, the polite lie.
Exactly.
You nod enthusiastically and say, oh, wow, hiking. I love nature. Hiking is the best.
And you think you are building rapport, but you've just built a trap for yourself.
Because David is immediately going to ask, oh, what's your favorite trail? And now you are either exposed as a total fraud, or you are condemned to spend the next 20 minutes desperately faking knowledge about hiking boots and, like, elevation games.
And the anxiety of maintaining that lie just destroys any real connection you could have made.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Okay, the alternative trap is just as damaging, right?
Yes, which is the abrupt shutdown.
The brick wall?
Right.
You just stare blankly and say, oh, I hate bugs. I don't go outside.
Right. Which penalizes the other person for sharing their interest. It creates this sudden, chilling silence.
It's like pouring ice water on the conversation. But Sarah navigates this intersection flawlessly. She says, I'm more of an indoor person, to be honest. I love reading, and I'm taking a cooking class on weekends. Always wanted to learn how to make decent pasta from scratch.
It's brilliant.
I look at this as conversational Aikido.
Oh, break down the mechanics of that Aikido metaphor in this context.
Okay, so in the martial art of Aikido, you don't block an attacker's energy with rigid opposing force. If they lunge at you, you don't punch back.
You don't meet force with force.
Exactly. You step to the side, you capture their momentum, and you smoothly redirect it so you both stay on your feet.
Right.
When David throws the hiking energy at Sarah, she doesn't block it by insulting hiking. She respectfully steps out of the way by defining her own boundary. I'm an indoor person, and then she redirects the momentum into a new topic she actually cares about. Cooking.
It is a graceful boundary setting. She creates a contrast without creating conflict.
Contrast without conflict. I love that phrasing.
And she provides extremely specific details, right? Making pasta from scratch, which gives David a brand new hook to grab onto.
And it works perfectly. David grabs the hook, admits he is terrible in the kitchen, and says he basically lives on takeout. They start bantering.
But driving this entire exchange, from the job history to the pasta making, is a fundamental engine that cannot be ignored.
What's that in?
They're relentlessly asking follow-up questions.
Yes. Follow-up questions are the definitive metric of active listening.
They really are. Many people operate under the delusion that a good conversation is just an equitable division of airtime.
Like a math equation.
Right. Like, I speak for 2 minutes, then you speak for 2 minutes.
Which isn't a conversation at all. It's a hostage situation where both people are just silently rehearsing what they want to say next while pretending to listen.
That is so accurate. A statement without a follow-up question is an orphaned thought.
An orphaned thought. That's a great way to put it.
When David mentions the tech startup earlier, Sarah doesn't just nod and say, cool. She asks, what kind of startup is it?
She digs deeper.
She is demonstrating curiosity in real time. It signals, I am processing the world you are describing, and I find it valuable enough to want more detail. That is the essence of C2 level emotional intelligence.
So we've seen how these tools, the presumptive opening, the release valve of vulnerability, conversational aikido, and aggressive curiosity work beautifully when you are trying to establish a bond in a relatively low-stakes environment, like an office lunch.
Right, because if the conversation fizzles out there, the worst consequence is just an awkward walk back to your cubicle.
Exactly. You just put your headphones back on. But what happens when we take these exact same mechanics and apply them to an environment where the stakes are astronomical?
That changes things.
Let's move from the cafeteria to the living room.
Family dynamics.
Yeah.
The most challenging conversational terrain that exists.
Unquestionably. So in our second scenario from the source material, we have a mother, Emma, and her 20-year-old son, Jake.
Right.
Jake works at a bookstore. It has been a year since he graduated high school. His friends have all marched off to traditional 4-year universities, and Jake is, well, he's paralyzed by a quarter-life crisis.
Very common at that age.
Very. He doesn't know what he wants to do, so he is basically doing nothing.
And the historical baggage here is immense. With family, you aren't just reacting to the words being spoken right now. You are reacting to 20 years of perceived criticisms, unmet expectations, and deep-seated fears.
So much subtext. Let's talk about the parental terror. From Emma's perspective, her brain is flashing red alert sirens. She sees her son drifting.
Naturally.
And the primal instinct for a parent is to fix the problem immediately to soothe her own anxiety.
Yes, which leads to the default parental opening, which is usually a demand wrapped in panic.
Right. Something like, what are your plans? You can't just work at a bookstore forever. Have you applied to any programs yet?
Which is an aggressive interrogation that practically guarantees a defensive response. It backs the son into a corner where his only options are to either fight back or shut down completely.
But Emma, in this scenario, she exercises an astonishing level of discipline. She approaches Jake, and her opening line is simply, I just want to understand what you're thinking these days.
Notice the complete absence of a demand for action.
It's incredible. She has to swallow all of her fear about his future, and instead of demanding a 5-year plan, she simply asks for a window into his current mental state.
She strips the judgment entirely out of the opening.
She is establishing a safe container, communicating, I am an ally trying to see the map from your perspective, not a judge evaluating your progress.
And because she creates that psychological safety, Jake actually opens up. He gives a very vulnerable confession.
What does he say?
He admits that he sees his friends acting so confident about their majors, but he is terrified of committing to a 4-year degree and acquiring massive debt without being absolutely certain it is the right path for him.
Which is a very valid fear.
Extremely valid.
And Emma's response to this confession is a technique that can fundamentally alter the trajectory of any conflict. Our sources call it reframing.
Yes. Reframing is the cognitive process of taking a specific behavior or event and consciously choosing to view it through a different, often more positive, interpretive lens.
Okay, so right now, society, and probably Jake himself, is labeling his hesitation negatively.
Right? The easy labels are lazy, indecisive, or fearful.
And if Emma agrees with those negative labels, if she says, you're just being indecisive, you need to pick a lane, she confirms his deepest insecurities, and the walls immediately go up.
The conversation would be over.
But instead, Emma takes that exact same behavior, his refusal to rush into a massive commitment, and she reframes it. She says, that actually sounds very mature to me. There's nothing wrong with taking time to make an informed decision.
The psychological impact of labeling someone as mature in the middle of a tense discussion is profound.
It changes the whole vibe.
It does.
Yeah.
In behavioral psychology, there is a phenomenon called the Pygmalion effect.
Pygmalion effect. Okay, what is that?
It dictates that people generally adjust their performance to meet the expectations placed upon them.
Oh, wow.
So by labeling his thought process as mature and thoughtful, Emma is actively constructing a reality where Jake feels respected as an adult. He's far more likely to continue acting maturely to protect that new positive label she just gave him.
That is so smart. It completely prevents the immediate spiral into a screaming match.
Exactly.
And this is a crucial point we need to emphasize from the sources, advanced communication is not about boundless toxic positivity.
No, not at all.
It's not about avoiding conflict at all costs. Emma is still a parent, and she has legitimate real-world concerns about her son's momentum. She isn't just going to smile and say, take 10 years to figure it out while living in my basement.
Right. True fluency requires the capacity to navigate disagreement without destroying the relationship.
Exactly. So Emma voices her fear. She says she is worried that if he stays out of school for too long, it might become incredibly difficult to get back into the academic mindset.
The very real concern.
But because Emma spent the first half of the conversation building trust and validating his perspective, Jake can hear this criticism without feeling attacked.
He's receptive to it now.
Yes, he actually proposes a compromise. He brings up the idea of starting at a local community college to knock out general education courses without the pressure of declaring a major right away.
And pay close attention to how Jake introduces his compromise here. He says, I've thought about that too.
I've thought about that too. That is such a subtle but powerful phrase.
It is essential. Before he introduces his counter-argument, he explicitly validates her premise.
Right.
He acknowledges that her worry about the academic mindset is a logical, valid concern. He joins her on her side of the table before presenting his own map.
Which makes her so much more willing to look at his map.
Precisely.
So Emma agrees that community college is a solid plan. And then Jake asks her a question that prompts one of the most powerful tools in human communication. He assumes Emma always knew she wanted to be a nurse.
The classic assumption kids make about their parents.
Right, that they had it all figured out. But Emma corrects him by sharing a personal story. She reveals that she actually started her college career absolutely convinced she was going to be an elementary school teacher.
Which is quite a pivot.
It is. She says it wasn't until a grueling science requirement in her second year that she fell in love with biology, changed her entire major, and pivoted to nursing.
Now, why do you think a personal narrative like that is more effective in this moment than simply giving advice?
Well, because giving advice from a position of authority often feels like you are shouting driving directions at someone who is lost in the woods.
Oh, that's a vivid image.
Imagine Jake is wandering through a dense forest, panicking. If Emma stands on a hill and shouts, "Go left! No, your other left! Watch out for the ditch!"
Yeah.
It just amplifies his panic.
It makes him feel worse.
It makes the lost person feel stupid for not knowing the way. But storytelling is different. Storytelling is walking into the woods, sitting down next to the panicked person, pulling out your own battered, torn map and saying, "Look at all these wrong turns I took. Look at where I got stuck in the mud. My path was a complete mess too, but here is how I eventually found the road."
That is the ultimate demystification of success.
Yes, demystifying it.
By sharing her non-linear, messy career path, she proves that changing your mind isn't a symptom of failure. It is a standard feature of the human experience.
It radically reduces his shame, and if we analyze the specific vocabulary being used in this living room, we see why the source texts highlight this as C2-level discourse.
Let's look at the words.
They are using phrases like maintain forward momentum, financial stability, and academic mindset.
The vocabulary choice dictates the register of the entire conversation.
The register.
Yes, the tone and formality. If Emma had said, "You need to keep busy," it sounds like a mother nagging a teenager to clean his room.
Very condescending.
Right. But by elevating the diction to maintain forward momentum, she alters the atmosphere. She is speaking to him as an intellectual equal, capable of high-level life planning. It commands respect by freely giving respect.
It treats him like an adult, so he acts like one. So we have dissected the beginnings and the messy middles of these two very different interactions.
Yeah.
But there is a distinct mechanical way that both of these conversations conclude.
And this is vital. Advanced communicators do not leave interactions twisting in the wind.
They don't just trail off awkwardly.
No, the conclusion is where the abstract connection is forged into a tangible reality.
Both scenarios end with incredibly specific, concrete plans. In the office, Sarah doesn't just say, well, see you around the water cooler.
Which is what most people say.
Right, it's so vague. Instead, she invites David to join a specific group of coworkers for drinks on Friday at a local bar, and they reiterate the future pasta-making lesson.
A very clear next step.
In the living room, Emma and Jake don't just agree that community college is a nice idea, they commit to a specific action. They agree to sit down together that coming weekend to actively review the enrollment websites.
A concrete plan is the anchor.
The anchor.
Without it, the goodwill generated during the conversation simply evaporates the moment the two people walk away. By attaching the positive emotional resonance of the talk to a future scheduled event, you transform a fleeting interaction into the foundation of a lasting relationship.
But how do they get there so smoothly? Like, how do you transition from deep emotional vulnerability or banter into scheduling a meeting without sounding like a project manager?
It can sound very robotic if you aren't careful.
Exactly. And this is where we need to spend some serious time looking at the microscopic linguistic tools that glue all of this together. I am talking about conversational connectors.
The unsung heroes.
Words like actually, honestly, to be honest, speaking of which.
In linguistics, these are often referred to as pragmatics, specifically hedging and discourse markers. And they are the true glue of fluency.
If you look at these words on a transcript, logically, they seem like filler. They don't change the factual data of a sentence.
Not at all.
If I say, I am an indoor person, the core fact is identical to saying, to be honest, I'm more of an indoor person. A computer would read those two sentences as containing the exact same data.
But emotionally, biologically, they hit the human ear in completely different ways.
They absolutely do.
Let's role play the difference to understand the visceral impact here. Say the phrase without the connector, pretending I just asked you if you like my favorite band.
Okay. I don't like their music.
Ouch!
Yeah, that felt harsh.
That feels abrupt. It feels confrontational. It sounds like a declarative ruling from a judge. Now, add the hedging.
To be honest, I don't really like their music.
The difference in social friction is massive.
It feels so much gentler.
When you use a phrase like to be honest or actually, you are doing several highly sophisticated things simultaneously. First, you are providing a microsecond of buffer time.
A buffer time.
You are signaling to the listener's brain, prepare yourself, the information I am about to deliver might contradict your expectation. Second, you are intentionally softening the blow of the contradiction.
It shows deference to the other person's feelings. It preserves social harmony.
Exactly. Politeness theory in linguistics revolves around the concept of preserving face.
Preserving face.
By saying actually, you are protecting the other person's face. You are framing your differing opinion not as a universal truth, but as a subjective, slightly apologetic personal quirk. It makes the language sound incredibly natural and emotionally resonant. It strips away the robotic textbook cadence.
It creates the illusion of spontaneity, too. When David says, I was actually hoping to meet more people, that word actually makes it sound like the thought just organically materialized in his brain at that exact second, rather than sounding like a rehearsed line he practiced in the mirror.
Exactly. Or when Emma says, that actually sounds very mature, the connector emphasizes that she is genuinely surprised. It amplifies the authenticity of her validation.
And then we have transitional markers like, speaking of which, these act as the pivot joints of a conversation.
They are crucial for flow.
I think of them like the clutch in a manual car. You can't just slam the gear shift from topic A to topic B. You will grind the gears and the conversation will stall out.
Precisely. If you abruptly change the subject, it signals to the other person that you are not listening to them at all. You were just waiting for your turn to talk about what you wanted to talk about.
Which is the worst feeling.
It is. Speaking of which, takes a fragment of the previous topic and uses it to seamlessly launch the next one. It honors what was just said while maintaining forward momentum.
So as we pull back and look at the entirety of these blueprints we've discussed today, the grand takeaway from the sources is vividly clear.
It really is.
Reaching an advanced master level of communication, whether in English, your native language, or any dialect, is not about memorizing a dictionary. It is not about speaking with flawless, unyielding precision.
Because flawless precision is often a barrier to connection. It makes you unapproachable.
True mastery is fundamentally about how you handle the human element. It is the discipline of asking meaningful follow-up questions that prove you are genuinely curious about the mind of the person sitting across from you.
It's the bravery to deploy past tense vulnerability.
Right, letting the air out of the pressure valve so others feel safe enough to drop their armor.
And it's the empathy to reframe someone's anxieties into strengths and the intentionality to close the loop with concrete future plans.
And it requires accepting that making mistakes is not a failure of communication.
Not at all. It is often the very thing that humanizes you. Stumbling over a word while passionately sharing a messy, non-linear story will build a far stronger relationship than reciting a perfect, cold monologue.
So if you're listening to this, we want you to take these mechanics out of the theoretical realm and test them in the real world. That is your call to action for this deep dive.
Yes, try it out.
Sometime this week, challenge yourself to deploy just one of these tools. When someone mentions a hobby, resist the urge to just say, cool, and instead ask a probing follow-up question.
Or try using a phrase like, speaking of which, to smoothly transition a topic at dinner.
Or, if you are in a leadership position, briefly share a story of a past struggle with a new team member. Treat it as a deliberate experiment in building connection.
You will likely be astonished by how quickly the physiological tension leaves the room and how the dynamic shifts from transactional to collaborative.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. During that heavy family conversation, Emma tells Jake that very few 20-year-olds have their entire lives mapped out, despite the flawless confidence they project on social media.
Oh, social media, the ultimate illusion.
Right. We live in an era that is completely obsessed with curating an illusion of competence. We desperately want the world to think we have all the answers. We build these incredibly shiny, impenetrable suits of armor.
And then we wonder why we feel so isolated while wearing them.
Exactly. What if true elite-level fluency isn't about having the perfect vocabulary to sound bulletproof, brilliant, and completely in control?
What if it's the opposite?
What if the ultimate mastery of communication is actually having the courage and the specific linguistic tools to articulate your uncertainties, your fears, and your vulnerabilities perfectly?
That is a powerful thought.
Because as we've seen today, from the terrified new guy in the cafeteria to the paralyzed son trying to find his way in the world, it is almost never our perfections that bind us to other people. It is our shared, messy, lost moments.
The moments when we admit we don't have the map.
The next time you find yourself staring at a stranger, dreading the awkward silence, remember that you don't need a magical gift of charisma to cross the divide. You just need to be willing to wade into the murky waters, drop your armor, and say, I've been lost here too.
Welcome to the deep dive. I want you to just picture this scenario for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
So you spent maybe 5, maybe 10 years studying English. You've memorized all the vocabulary flashcards.
Right, the endless flashcards.
Exactly. You know the subjunctive tense perfectly. You know the distance between a gerund and a present participle. And then, you step into a room full of native speakers interacting in the real world.
And we all know what happens next.
Yeah. You walk up to a group, the conversation shifts to you, and within 10 seconds, the entire interaction is just dead.
Completely flatlined.
You're just standing there in this awful, awkward silence, completely paralyzed. So today, we're really dissecting the hidden mechanics of human connection to figure out why, swallowing a textbook won't save you in that room.
Because it absolutely won't.
No, it won't. And we want to figure out what actually will. Because today's mission is demystifying what it truly means to have C2 advanced conversational skills in English.
It's honestly the ultimate frustration for language learners. And frankly, it's a huge hurdle for anyone who just wants to be a more effective communicator in their own native language, too.
Oh, for sure.
We have this really misguided assumption that communication is an additive process. We treat it like building a fortress,
Right, like stacking bricks.
Exactly. We assume that if we just acquire enough lexical bricks, if we memorize 1,000 more words, we'll suddenly just possess perfect fluency.
But that's not how it works at all.
No, because fluency, like true C2 level mastery, it doesn't live in a dictionary. It lives in the spaces between people.
The spaces between people. I like that.
Yeah, it's entirely about your ability to make the person standing across from you feel comfortable and understood and socially safe.
Which, that completely shifts the paradigm, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If the goal isn't just to sound like a walking thesaurus, then what exactly are we supposed to be doing?
That is the big question.
And to figure that out, we've got some really incredible source material on the table today. We are looking at verbatim transcripts and these deep linguistic breakdowns of 2 very different real-life scenarios.
Very different, but they both highlight these skills perfectly.
Yeah. So one is this classic workplace interaction, just strangers meeting in an office. And the other is a really heavy emotionally fraught family discussion between a mother and her adult son.
High stakes in that one.
Very high stakes. And the sources take these transcripts and essentially put them under a microscope, analyzing not just what these people are saying, but, the underlying social and psychological functions of their sentences.
And what makes these sources so compelling is that they strip away all the abstract grammatical theory. There's no textbook stuff here.
No, it's real life.
They throw us right into the wild. They show us the mechanics of advanced communication operating under pressure. So the goal of our deep dive today is to isolate these specific, actionable techniques from the transcripts.
You can actually use them.
Precisely. We want to extract the framework so that you, listening to this right now, can immediately adapt them to your own interactions, no matter where you currently are on the fluency spectrum.
As I was reading through the source material, trying to wrap my head around this whole shift from vocabulary hoarding to social connection, I actually came up with an analogy.
Oh, let's hear it.
Think about the game of chess. Learning the vocabulary and the grammar of a language is exactly like learning how the pieces move on a chessboard.
Okay, I track with that.
You learn that the knight moves in an L shape. You memorize that the bishop stays on its color. That's just foundational knowledge. But having C2 conversational skills, that is the equivalent of actually knowing how to play a beautiful strategic game.
It's the application of the rules, not just knowing them.
Exactly. It's reading the board, anticipating your opponent's emotional state, maybe sacrificing a pawn to open up a new line of attack, and just creating a flow that moves the game forward.
That is an incredibly apt way to visualize it. I mean, you can memorize the rule book cover to cover, and you will still lose the game in 5 moves if you don't understand the broader strategy of positioning and connection.
You just get crushed.
Right. Because communication is not a solitary recital, it is a deeply collaborative game. And in the first transcript provided in our sources, we really get to see a masterclass in how an advanced speaker opens that game.
Yeah, they instantly set the board in their favor.
Exactly. So let's look at that first scenario.
Okay, let's set the scene here.
Yeah.
We are in a corporate environment. Fluorescent lights, the low hum of the office cafeteria. And we have 2 characters.
Right, Sarah and David.
Yeah, first there's Sarah. And the sources give us some really important background on her. She's been working in the marketing department for about 6 months.
But that wasn't her first choice.
Right. Crucially, she struggled for quite a while to find a job in her actual chosen field of journalism. She finally compromised and took this marketing role. So she really knows what it feels like to be uncertain and overwhelmed.
And that context is vital because it informs her empathy throughout the interaction. She isn't a 20-year veteran of the company who has completely forgotten what it's like to be the new person.
She remembers the friction.
She remembers the friction of adaptation, yes.
Exactly. And the person she's meeting is David. Now, David is kind of the archetype of the new guy. He just joined the creative team as a graphic designer.
But he's carrying some baggage, right?
A lot of baggage. The sources note that he just left a highly toxic, incredibly stressful job at a high-pressure downtown ad agency.
So he's probably exhausted.
Oh, he's likely burnt out, defensive, and just bringing a lot of professional trauma into this new role.
So what we have here is a classic moment of high social friction. We have 2 relative strangers forced by the organization to establish a working relationship.
Which is usually so painful.
In a lower level interaction, this is exactly where you get that agonizing, stilted exchange of basic biographical facts.
Yeah, awkward interview phase.
Yes, but notice how Sarah bypasses that entirely.
She does. She just walks right up to him in the cafeteria. And her opening line is simply, "Hi, you must be David, the new guy in the creative team."
Right.
Now, on the surface, that looks like a totally throwaway line. It looks completely unremarkable. But the sources highlight this as a prime top-tier C2 technique.
It's unremarkable only if you ignore the pragmatics of what she is actively avoiding.
Okay, unpack that. What is she avoiding?
Let's look at the alternative. The standard intermediate level approach would be to walk up, extend a hand, and say, "Hello, my name is Sarah. What is your name? Are you new here?"
Ugh, yeah. That just puts the entire cognitive and social burden on David to explain his own existence in the room.
Precisely. It essentially demands that he justify his presence to a stranger. It's an interrogation.
It really is.
But by saying, "You must be David," she employs a concept in linguistics known as epistemic modality.
Epistemic modality. That sounds intense.
It just means she's using prior knowledge to assert a high probability of his identity. She isn't asking, she's recognizing.
Ah, I see.
This instantly bypasses the cold introduction and creates a sort of manufactured yet highly effective sense of familiarity.
It's like she's saying, "I already know who you are."
Exactly. It sends a powerful, implicit social signal. You are already known here, you are expected, you are not an outsider, you belong in our shared ecosystem.
Wow. And it goes even deeper than that, because she doesn't just stop at his name. She anchors him to his role. She says, the new guy in the creative team.
Right, providing context.
Yeah, she's giving him his identity within the context of the tribe. It just removes so much of the anxiety of being the new person. And David's response actually proves that it works.
Because he doesn't just give a one-word answer.
Right. A simple yes would mean the social friction is still really high. But he expands his response. He says, yeah, that's me. I was actually hoping to meet more people from other departments.
He's offering a conversational bridge right there.
Yeah, he's signaling that he's receptive to the connection. And this is where the interaction moves from, like a polite introduction into a fascinating display of shared vulnerability.
This is a great part of the transcript.
Sarah asks how his first week is going. But before he even has to answer, she offers up a piece of herself. She says, I remember feeling completely lost when I started here 6 months ago.
She preemptively normalizes the struggle.
Exactly.
This is a masterstroke of psychological safety. By admitting her own past confusion, she actually lowers her own status slightly to meet him where he currently is.
She's leveling the playing field.
Yes. She's giving him explicit social permission to admit if he is struggling, without the fear of looking incompetent on his first week.
And David takes the bait. I mean, he completely opens up about his baggage. He mentions that he came from this small, hyper-intense ad agency downtown, and he specifically highlights the burnout.
He really goes into it.
He talks about the long hours and the completely unreasonable, demanding clients. Now, complaining to a new coworker on your very first week, I mean, that's generally considered a massive professional faux pas.
It's a huge risk.
It's a massive risk. But Sarah's response is what the sources call out as a textbook example of advanced validation. She doesn't pull away.
What'd she say?
He says, oh, I totally get that. I actually came from a similar situation. And then she immediately pivots to praising their current company's work-life balance.
Structurally, this is a brilliant maneuver. When we analyze advanced language skills, the ability to build and sustain immediate rapport is a core metric.
And they built it fast.
They did.
Yeah.
David takes a calculated social risk by airing a mild grievance about his past. He's testing the waters to see what the cultural norms of this new environment are.
Seeing if it's safe to complain.
Right. And Sarah catches that conversational bid. She validates it with a strong affirmative. I totally get that. And then mirrors his vulnerability by referencing her own difficult background.
It's basically an emotional handshake.
It is an emotional handshake. It's a technique of matching emotional tones. But notice the crucial second step she takes here.
The pivot.
Yes. She doesn't let the conversation wallow in negativity. She doesn't turn it into a competition of who had the worst previous boss.
Like, oh, your boss was bad. Listen to this.
Exactly, which is what a lot of people do. Instead, once she establishes that they share a similar past trauma, she instantly pivots the energy forward into a positive, shared reality.
The fact that their current company actually respects work-life balance.
Precisely. She transitions them from shared misery to shared relief.
The sources really emphasize how effortlessly they weave this deep personal alignment right back into the professional sphere. Because right after they establish this bond, they get down to business.
They pivot back to work.
Yeah. Sarah brings up a tangible upcoming project. She outlines a campaign they'll be working on together for a tech startup, specifically a company that develops business-to-business apps like inventory management and customer service software.
So they talk shop.
They talk shop. They prove they are competent professionals to each other. But then the conversation pivots a third time, entirely away from work, into the realm of weekend hobbies.
The dangerous territory.
Very dangerous. Yeah. And this is actually where I hit a massive roadblock when I was reading the sources.
A roadblock? Where did the transcript lose you?
Well, it lost me because it seemed to violate a fundamental rule of human interaction. Like, let's look at the text. Sarah asks David what he likes to do outside of the office to decompress.
A standard small talk question.
Right. And David completely lights up. He explains that he's incredibly outdoorsy. He's into intense rock climbing. He does backcountry hiking. And he's talking about these specific trails an hour north of the city.
He's clearly very passionate about this.
Very. And Sarah's response. She explicitly shuts it down. She says, verbatim, I'm more of an indoor person, to be honest. I love reading, and I'm currently taking a pasta making class.
And you view that as a conversational failure?
I view it as incredibly risky. I mean, conventional wisdom, or at least the basic rules of social lubrication and politeness, dictates that you're supposed to feign interest to build rapport.
You think she should have lied?
Not a malicious lie, but a little social masking. Shouldn't she have said, "Oh, wow, rock climbing. That sounds absolutely terrifying, but so fascinating. What's the highest mountain you've climbed?"
I see.
Isn't admitting that you have zero overlap in interests right off the bat kind of a dangerous move for someone trying to be a C2 communicator?
That is a very perceptive challenge. But what you are describing, feigning interest, employing white lies for the sake of social lubrication, is exactly what a mid-level communicator does.
Really? It just feels safer.
It is a protective mechanism, sure, but the source material specifically highlights Sarah's response because it demonstrates the critical difference between intermediate politeness and advanced authenticity.
But why is authenticity better here? Faking it avoids any immediate friction.
It avoids friction for roughly 30 seconds, but it almost invariably leads to a conversational dead end. Let's play out your hypothetical scenario. Let's say Sarah pretends to be fascinated by rock climbing. What happens next?
I guess David keeps talking to her because he thinks she actually cares.
Exactly. David, encouraged by her fake enthusiasm, begins to dive into the minutia of the sport. He starts talking about bouldering routes, carabiner load capacities, and elevation games.
Oh, no.
He might even enthusiastically invite her to join his climbing gym. Now, Sarah is trapped.
Yeah, she is.
She lacks both the genuine interest and the highly specific domain vocabulary to sustain her end of the dialogue. Her cognitive load skyrockets as she desperately tries to maintain the charade.
Because she has no idea what a carabiner is.
Right. And the energy of the interaction inevitably flatlines because she is contributing nothing of substance. She has engineered her own conversational demise.
Okay, wow. When you frame it like that, the polite approach sounds like a complete disaster waiting to happen. She'd be stuck just smiling and nodding while he gives an hour-long lecture on climbing gear.
Precisely. Now analyze what Sarah actually does in the transcript. She employs a technique of respectful redirection.
Respectful redirection.
Yes. She doesn't insult his hobby. She acknowledges it, but firmly delineates her own boundaries. By saying, "I'm more of an indoor person, to be honest." She uses the phrase "to be honest" as a mitigating device.
A mitigating device.
It acts as a syntactic softener. It lowers the social impact of her contrasting preference.
It's like she's saying, don't take this personally, but we are very different.
Yes. And then, crucially, she doesn't just leave a void in the conversation. She immediately fills the space with her own area of expertise and passion, reading and her culinary class.
And because she pivots to something she genuinely cares about, her tone of voice naturally remains enthusiastic. Like the energy of the interaction doesn't drop, it just changes lanes.
Exactly. And look at the ultimate result of that pivot. By introducing the topic of cooking, she accidentally creates a perfect entry point for David.
Oh, right. Because David admits he can't cook.
He immediately admits that he is completely incompetent in the kitchen and basically survives entirely on takeout food. This creates a highly natural, unforced opportunity for connection.
Yeah, Sarah playfully offers to teach him the basics of cooking once she masters her pasta class.
Which is infinitely better than Sarah awkwardly trying to figure out how to decline an invitation to go scale a cliff.
So true. The authenticity actually generated a much stronger bond than a polite lie ever could.
True fluency is not simply the ability to construct a grammatically flawless sentence about a topic you hate.
I love that.
Fluency is the strategic confidence to steer a conversation out of a dead zone and into mutually beneficial territory. Sarah's pivot wasn't a rejection of David. It was an invitation to find better shared ground.
That reframes the entire concept of small talk for me. It's not just about what subjects they're exploring. It's the underlying, almost invisible mechanics of how they are navigating between those subjects.
Which perfectly transitions us to the next major insight from the sources.
Right, because we've looked at the macro strategy, but now we need to look at the micro tactics, the actual sentence-level linguistic tools that these C2 speakers are deploying to keep the flow alive.
We are moving from the architecture of the conversation to the actual mortar holding the bricks together.
Yeah. The sources spend a significant amount of time highlighting these tiny, seemingly insignificant words and phrases. We're talking about discourse markers.
The tiny words that do the heavy lifting.
Exactly. Words like honestly, to be honest, actually, speaking of which, and phrases like that sounds amazing. Alongside these markers, the sources place a massive emphasis on the concept of the follow-up engine.
The follow-up engine is paramount. If you want to diagnose why a conversation feels stilted or unnatural, the very first thing you look at is the presence or absence of a follow-up engine.
It's so obvious when it's missing.
A conversation without follow-up questions is not a conversation at all. It is simply two individuals taking turns delivering monologues at each other.
I think we've all been trapped in that exact dynamic. It feels like you were just exchanging press releases about your respective lives. I did this. Oh, interesting. Well, I did this. It's just exhausting.
It is conversational narcissism, even if it's unintentional. The follow-up question is the primary engine of engagement.
Let's look back at the transcript for an example.
Good idea. When Sarah shares that she has a background in journalism and implies that she struggled to find work in that field, which, as we discussed, is a vulnerable admission, David doesn't just nod and offer a platitude like, oh, wow, journalism is tough.
Right. He doesn't just let the statement die on the table. He actively picks it up. He mentions that his background is strictly in graphic design, and then he asks her a very targeted question.
Yeah.
How does the marketing side of things work for someone with a journalism brain?
That specific back-and-forth questioning proves active listening. It signals to the speaker that you are not merely silently rehearsing what you were going to say next while they talk.
Which so many people do.
They do. But here, you are actively processing their narrative, integrating it with your own knowledge, and inviting them to elaborate. It is the lifeblood of advanced communication.
And what allows them to bounce between these topics so effortlessly are those discourse markers we mentioned earlier. I was actually pondering this while reviewing the linguistic breakdowns of the sources, and I want to try out an analogy on you. Okay, I'm ready. I think these conversational connectors, the actuallys and the speaking of which, are essentially the suspension system of a car.
The suspension system. Walk me through the mechanics of that comparison.
Well, think about driving a high-end car down the highway.
Yeah.
You don't ever actively notice the suspension system. Right. It operates entirely out of sight. You just experience a phenomenally smooth ride.
Okay.
But imagine if you remove the shock absorbers entirely. Suddenly, every single pebble, every minor pothole, every slight change in the pavement jars your spine.
It would be awful.
The ride becomes incredibly bumpy, robotic, and just physically uncomfortable. In a conversation, a pothole is a sudden topic shift. Without these tiny connecting words acting as shock absorbers, the listener experiences cognitive whiplash.
That is a remarkably accurate linguistic comparison. These markers are technically categorized as mitigating devices and transition signals. They reduce the cognitive load on the listener's brain.
Exactly. Let's look at how David uses it in the transcript. At one point, he's talking about his job interview experience, and then he wants to ask Sarah about her career history.
How does he transition?
He says, yeah, I noticed the company culture during the interview. Speaking of which, how did you end up in marketing?
Speaking of which.
Yes. The phrase, speaking of which, is the shock absorber. It explicitly tells Sarah's brain, I am about to take a slight detour from the current topic, but I promise you it is logically tethered to what we were just discussing.
If he had omitted that phrase, if he had simply stated, I noticed that during the interview, how did you end up in marketing? The transition would feel incredibly abrasive.
It would feel jarring.
It would sound less like a conversation and more like a deposition.
It totally prevents conversational whiplash. The sources make a really strong point of stating that mastering these specific phrases makes a speaker sound instantly more fluent, almost regardless of their actual vocabulary size.
It's a huge return on investment for language learners.
So if you are listening to this right now and you want an immediate, actionable upgrade to your English, start deliberately sprinkling these connectors into your daily chats.
Just try them out.
Yeah, honestly, to soften the blow of a contrasting opinion. Use actually to gently introduce a surprising fact without sounding pedantic. And crucially, the sources emphasize that you shouldn't be afraid of using them incorrectly at first.
Fumbling a transition is completely normal.
Right, it's actually a necessary part of the neurological learning process.
Experimentation is absolutely vital. These markers are the definitive hallmark of natural, spontaneous speech. However, we must introduce a pretty significant caveat here.
Okay, what's the caveat?
It is one thing to master the use of, speaking of which, when you are having a low-stakes conversation about pasta-making classes and graphic design software.
Very true. The stakes in the cafeteria are relatively low.
The ultimate stress test of C2 fluency, the true measure of communicative mastery, is whether you can maintain access to these advanced linguistic tools when you are plunged into high-stakes, emotionally volatile terrain.
And that observation transitions us perfectly into the second and much heavier scenario provided in our source material. We are leaving the relatively safe confines of the office cafeteria and stepping right into the middle of a living room.
We are shifting from a dynamic of professional rapport building to a scenario fraught with deep-seated familial tension and the potential for explosive conflict.
Yeah. Let me establish the context for the second transcript, because the psychological stakes are incredibly high here. We have mother, Emma, and her 20-year-old son, Jake.
A classic dynamic.
It's very classic. Jake is currently trapped in a profound state of arrested development. He graduated from high school nearly a year ago. Currently, he is working a retail job at a local bookstore, and he is entirely paralyzed regarding his future.
He's stuck.
Completely stuck. He is watching his peer group, his friends who confidently marched off to universities and declared their majors, and he feels like he is falling catastrophically behind. But his response to this anxiety is just complete inertia.
This is a remarkably common yet deeply explosive family dynamic. The psychological landscape here is incredibly fragile.
The tension must be thick.
Oh, absolutely. The parent is consumed by anxiety regarding the child's long-term trajectory. The child is flooded with shame, insecurity, and defensiveness. In a baseline reactive communication model, this setup almost instantly triggers the biological fight-or-flight response.
Right. It never ends well.
It devolves into a screaming match, or alternatively, a complete withdrawal into sullen silence.
Oh, absolutely. The standard script writes itself. The parent demands, "What are you doing with your life? Why aren't you enrolling in classes?" And the kid yells, "Get off my back! Leave me alone!" and storms out of the room.
It's entirely predictable.
But Emma, the mother in this transcript, executes a conversational opening that completely short-circuits that expected argument. The sources highlight her specific phrasing as a safe space opener.
It's brilliantly executed.
She sits down, looks at him, and simply says, "I just want to understand what you're thinking these days."
I just want to understand. That 9-syllable sentence is a masterclass in applied emotional intelligence and advanced pragmatics.
I really want to break that down. Why is that specific arrangement of words so incredibly powerful? Why does it work when asking, "Why aren't you in school?" fails so miserably?
It comes down to the neurology of threat perception.
Neurology. Okay, let's hear it.
When a human being feels judged or cornered, the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, literally hijacks the prefrontal cortex. The brain goes into a defensive posture, and access to rational, nuanced thought is severely restricted.
You literally can't think straight.
Exactly. If Emma had opened with a why question, like, why haven't you applied anywhere, Jake's brain would have instantly perceived it as an attack requiring a defense.
Because why implies judgment. It implies you've done something wrong and need to justify it.
Exactly. But by stating, "I just want to understand," Emma actively neutralizes the threat. She entirely removes the specter of judgment from the opening volley.
She's disarming him.
Yes. She establishes a collaborative rather than adversarial framework. She signals to his amygdala that she is not acting as an interrogator or a disappointed authority figure. She is positioning herself as an ally who is genuinely curious about his internal landscape.
And the transcript proves that this neurohack actually works.
Whoa.
Because Jake's walls don't go up. He actually exhales and opens up to her.
What does he reveal?
He articulates the root of his paralysis. He admits that he is dragging his feet because he is terrified of making the wrong choice. He wants to be absolutely 100% certain of his career path before he commits 4 years of his life and thousands of dollars to a specific university degree.
That's a very real fear.
It is. And Emma's response to this confession is arguably the most advanced technique we've seen yet. She listens to this fear and she responds by saying, "That actually sounds very mature to me."
This specific maneuver is known in psychology as cognitive reframing. And when used seamlessly in real-time conversation, it is the absolute pinnacle of C2 level communication.
The sources explicitly call this out as reframing concerns as strengths. How does the psychology behind this actually work?
Well, Jake is looking at his own behavior, his hesitation and his inertia, through a lens of deep shame. He views it as a critical weakness. He feels like a failure because he isn't moving as fast as his decisive friends. Emma takes that exact same set of facts, the fact that he is waiting and analyzing, and she completely changes the frame around it. She reinterprets his hesitation not as a flaw, but as evidence of a highly positive trait: thoughtfulness, caution, and maturity.
Wow.
She takes the very thing he is ashamed of and weaponizes it into a strength.
That is profound. By doing that, she totally alters the energetic frequency of the room. Instead of fighting his fear, she is validating the positive intention hiding underneath the fear.
Exactly. And because she establishes this incredibly deep foundation of emotional safety and trust, they are actually able to survive the inevitable friction that comes next.
Right, because this isn't just a purely supportive therapy session where Emma agrees with everything he says. She has legitimate parental concerns and she brings them up.
She doesn't just let him off the hook.
No. She tells him that she understands his caution, but she is deeply worried that if he waits too long, if he stays out of an educational environment indefinitely, he will lose his academic mindset.
A valid concern.
Very valid. Now, here is where Jake proves he's also operating at a high level. Instead of viewing her worry as an attack and getting defensive, he actually acknowledges her concern. He says he has been worrying about exactly the same thing.
They are aligned on the problem.
Yes. And then he proposes a compromise. He suggests taking some generalized exploratory courses at a local community college while simultaneously maintaining his job at the bookstore.
And notice how he advocates for himself here. He doesn't dismiss the bookstore job as a dead end.
Right. He defends its value.
He explicitly articulates the highly transferable skills he is acquiring there, managing complex inventory systems, and handling difficult customer service interactions to validate the utility of his current path.
He's showing maturity.
This exchange is the definition of respectful disagreement in action. Neither party's amygdala gets hijacked. They simply take their differing perspectives and place them into the shared pool of meaning, working collaboratively toward a solution.
Okay, I have to stop the analysis here and push back on this, much harder than I did with the workplace scenario. I need to play devil's advocate for the listener who is sitting in reality right now.
By all means, what is the core issue you see?
The issue is that reading this transcript, it just feels clinically sterilized. It reads like a script for a television show where every character has spent 10 years in intense psychotherapy.
It seems too perfect.
Yes. Sure, reframing a concern as a strength sounds fantastic in a linguistic breakdown. But let's talk about human biology. When it is your own kid sitting on the couch, wasting their potential, your cortisol levels are skyrocketing.
The stress is very real.
The adrenaline is pumping. The biological drive to scream, wake up and do something is overwhelming. Are these sources seriously suggesting that a normal human being can just consciously choose to deploy a sophisticated linguistic framework when they are completely flooded with anxiety and anger?
That is the most crucial question we can ask, and it strikes at the very heart of what separates theoretical language knowledge from actual lived C2 fluency. You are absolutely correct about the biology. The cortisol is real. The anger is real. The difference lies entirely in emotional regulation.
So you're saying that to be a master communicator, you basically have to conquer your own nervous system.
Precisely. Advanced communication is not just a cognitive exercise. It is an act of biological discipline.
Biological discipline.
Yes. When Emma feels that massive spike of parental panic, the rudimentary animalistic reaction is to immediately project that anxiety onto the source of the stress. Jake, you are falling behind. Fix it so I can feel better.
That's the default mode.
A C2 communicator, however, has developed the emotional maturity to observe their own biological reaction without immediately acting on it.
They don't let the emotion hijack their mouth.
Exactly. There is a famous psychological concept regarding the space between a stimulus and a response. Basic communicators have zero space there. They react instantly.
Right. Stimulus, then immediate reaction.
But advanced fluency lives entirely within that gap. Emma utilizes that momentary gap to forcefully regulate her own breathing, manage her anxiety, and deliberately select a linguistic tool like this safe space opener or the cognitive reframe that will build a bridge rather than detonate a bomb.
Wow. So the real prerequisite for advanced language skills isn't a better dictionary. It's the ability to pause. That is deeply challenging, but it explains why her strategy is so incredibly effective.
It takes practice, but it's essential.
And that brings us to how she ultimately cements this connection and guides Jake toward an actual solution. Because she doesn't just listen and validate. She does eventually offer guidance.
Yeah.
But it's the way she offers it that matters.
Yes, we're transitioning from the phase of diffusing the emotional bomb to the phase of actively constructing a pathway forward. And she achieves this not through a lecture, but through storytelling.
Storytelling. Emma tells Jake a story about her own youth. She reveals that when she was 20, she was absolutely convinced she was going to be an elementary school teacher.
A very set plan.
She enrolled as an education major, took classes for a full year, and then, entirely by accident, she took a mandatory biology prerequisite during her second year.
And everything changed.
Yeah. She fell completely in love with the science, radically changed her entire life plan, and pivoted into the nursing program.
If we analyze the mechanics of why this specific storytelling choice is so wildly effective, we only need to look at the alternative approach. The alternative is didactic lecturing.
Preaching.
Right. Emma could have easily looked at Jake and delivered a platitude. She could have said, Jake, life rarely goes according to your initial plan. It is perfectly acceptable to change your mind as you grow.
Which is undeniably true, but it's completely sterile. It's a cliche. It goes in one ear and out the other because it doesn't carry any emotional weight.
Clichés fail because they explicitly instruct the listener on what to think. A personal narrative, however, operates differently.
It shows instead of telling.
By exposing her own messy, non-linear path, by admitting that she wasted a year in the wrong major before finding her calling, she doesn't just tell him that uncertainty is okay, she proves it.
Right.
She steps down from the pedestal of infallible parental authority and speaks to him from the trenches of her own lived experience. This makes her inherent advice profoundly credible and deeply comforting to a young man terrified of making a misstep.
She embodies the lesson instead of just preaching it. And what fascinated me in the sources is the specific vocabulary highlighted during this part of the transcript. We see what the analysts call functional C2 vocabulary.
Yes, the text zeroes in on phrases like maintain forward momentum, the necessity of financial stability, and the importance of preserving an academic mindset.
I love that the sources highlight these specific phrases because it utterly destroys the myth we were talking about at the very beginning of the deep dive. The myth that advanced English requires using obscure $50 words when a $5 word will do just fine.
That's a very persistent myth.
Nobody in this deeply intellectual, highly effective conversation is using words like indubitably or obfuscate. They aren't trying to sound like Victorian novelists.
Because true linguistic mastery is heavily predicated on precision, not obscurity.
Precision.
Those phrases, forward momentum, academic mindset, are not syntactically complex, but they are surgically precise. They articulate incredibly complex, abstract life concepts with maximum efficiency.
They get right to the point.
When Emma advises Jake to maintain forward momentum, she isn't demanding a flawless 50-year career roadmap. She's communicating a fundamental physics of human development. It doesn't matter exactly which direction you are stepping as long as you are not standing still. That is functional, practical clarity.
It's using the absolute perfect tool for the job rather than the fanciest one in the box. And speaking of perfectly executed tools, we have finally arrived at the mechanism that we were obsessing over before we even started recording today.
Ah, yes, the ultimate closer.
The secret weapon that is actually identical in both of these wildly different transcripts.
This is the vital mechanism that ensures the preceding conversation, no matter how deep or emotionally resonant, wasn't just a pleasant evaporation of hot air.
Exactly. We are talking about the future plan. Let's look at the endings of both scenarios. In the workplace scenario in the cafeteria, Sarah doesn't just look at her watch, say great chatting, and walk away forever.
No, she locks it in.
She actively invites David to join the team for Friday afternoon drinks at a nearby bar, and she reiterates the offer for a future cooking lesson. In the family scenario, Jake and Emma don't just hug and go back to their separate corners of the house.
They make a concrete plan.
They mutually agree to sit down together, specifically this coming weekend, to actively look through the community college course catalogs.
Both of these interactions anchor the abstract emotional goodwill they have generated to a concrete, actionable commitment in physical reality.
You know, I came up with an analogy for this, and I think it perfectly captures the stakes here.
I'm intrigued. Let's hear the analogy.
Think about writing a highly important email. You can sit at your computer for hours. You can draft the most beautiful, thoughtful, eloquent, perfectly punctuated message in human history.
Okay.
But if you get distracted and forget to actually click the send button, it does not matter. The email sits in your drafts folder forever, fundamentally useless to the world.
That is a phenomenal parallel.
Having an incredibly deep, resonant conversation with another human being, but failing to lock in a concrete future plan, is the exact emotional equivalent of forgetting to hit send.
It really is.
The future plan is the send button on the relationship. It takes all the vulnerability, all the rapport, and all the shared relief, and it actually delivers it into the real world.
It is astonishing how frequently people, including, and perhaps especially native speakers, fail to execute this final step.
It happens all the time.
They engage in a wonderful, deeply connecting interaction, and then they let it dissolve with a vague, non-committal phrase like, We should definitely catch up sometime.
Sometime.
Sometime is not a time on any calendar. Sometime is the drafts folder.
Sometime is the graveyard where potential friendships go to die.
Precisely. Advanced communicators intrinsically understand that language is ultimately a vehicle for action. By explicitly stating, let's look at the websites this weekend, Emma and Jake are transitioning from a state of abstract emotional support to a state of concrete, real-world partnership.
They are hitting the send button.
They are hitting the send button.
It is so incredibly actionable. Okay, let's zoom out and synthesize everything we have unpacked today, because we have covered a massive amount of psychological and linguistic territory.
We have journeyed from the high-friction environment of a corporate cafeteria to the emotionally volatile landscape of family living room, and yet the underlying physics of connection have remained remarkably consistent.
Let's summarize the core actionable frameworks from our sources so you can take them with you. Advanced English, and really advanced human communication in any language on Earth, is fundamentally about connection, not perfection. It is not about hoarding the largest vocabulary.
It is entirely about deploying the invisible mechanics of connection.
Exactly. And those mechanics are, number one, utilize discourse markers. Use words like actually, to be honest, and speaking of which, as your conversational suspension system to smooth out the cognitive ride for your listener.
Crucial for a smooth ride.
Number two, power your interactions with the follow-up engine. Prove you are actively listening by asking targeted questions that move the narrative forward. Number three, when navigating high-stakes emotional terrain, regulate your own nervous system, use safe space openers to bypass the amygdala, and reframe concerns into strengths.
The hardest one, but the most important.
Number four, ditch the cliches and use personal storytelling to prove your points. And finally, number five, always remember to hit the send button. Anchor a great interaction with a highly specific, concrete future plan.
And as we conclude, I want to strongly reiterate the primary overarching directive from the source material. It is a direct call to action for you, the listener.
Listen closely to this.
Do not wait until you feel your language skills are perfect or good enough before you engage. Do not wait until you have conquered the dictionary.
Because the mistakes and the fumbled transitions are an evolutionary requirement of the learning process.
Exactly. Your immediate challenge is to take these psychological frameworks and apply them in the real world. Have at least one meaningful conversation this week where you consciously suppress the urge to monologue.
Just one conversation.
Yes. And instead, deliberately deploy a connecting phrase or intentionally ask a deep follow-up question. Focus your entire cognitive effort on making the person across from you feel deeply understood, and the linguistic fluency will naturally follow in its wake.
We started this deep dive by challenging the assumption that language learning is just stacking bricks of vocabulary. We've discovered that it is really about learning to play the strategic, deeply empathetic game of human connection. And as you go out into the world to play that game this week, I want to leave you with one final, lingering question to turn over in your mind.
A final thought to challenge your assumptions as you digest these concepts.
Exactly. If we now understand that true C2 level mastery of a language has very little to do with the sheer size of your vocabulary, and has absolutely everything to do with your ability to read a room, regulate your own biological stress responses, and make the person sitting across from you feel fundamentally safe and profoundly understood well, how fluently are you currently speaking your own native language? Think about it.